everyone. Happy Wine
Hey,
Wednesday. Hey,
happy
Jenny. Marlyn.
Wednesday, everyone. We are so excited to be with you guys today. As you can see, we have a beautiful guest, Marlyn Schulz. She's going to be talking to us about all things estate planning, and we will get to her more in-depth introduction a little bit later. But as per usual, we're going to start chatting about the wine first, which I'm very excited about. I think Michelle was actually drinking this wine last week, so she got a preview before every other person here.
I couldn't wait. It's
She
good.
was like, it's too good, Jenny. But we're drinking wine from Austria today. And I know some of you might be asking, what? It's not a Gruner Veltliner. And no, it's not, because I personally can't stand Gruner Veltliner. I think it tastes like cabbage. And I'm really sorry if I ruin that for other people who might like it. I just can't get rid of that note in my brain every single time I have it. Plus, I think it's boring. But we are drinking a Pinot Gris today, which is not to be confused with the Pinot Grigio. Pinot Grigio is going to be a little bit sweeter on the palate than a Pinot Gris. I always think of a Pinot Gris as much more elegant. It is going to be a little bit rounder in body than like a Sauvignon Blanc, but this one was aged for, I think, 18 months on lees in stainless steel. And lees are just yeast deposits that occur during the fermentation process that give a little bit more structure, texture, and body. But as we've talked about before, the stainless steel makes it really, really crisp and light and refreshing. So it's kind of this like weird juxtaposition of it's really crisp and really light and elegant and beautiful, but also kind of big in body. So love this one. One of my favorites. It's a little bit higher of a price point than we normally cover. I think it's at $18, which is still a steal, because to me, this is just so elegant and beautiful. And it's definitely something that would impress people if you brought it for the holidays, which I know we're heading into. So if you guys missed earlier on LinkedIn or on our YouTube channel, we posted it. If you guys are interested in checking this bottle out, I highly recommend it. Michelle told me that last week she loved it. And I also I love it too. So definitely a really good one. And we can get into our rose and thorn if you want to start us off, Michelle.
Sure. Okay. So let's see. So my rose for this week, well, I told everyone last week that it was my favorite week of the year because of Halloween. And so yesterday, my boyfriend and I went to this cool Halloween bar, and it was in the East Village, and it's kind of like a Beetlejuice theme. And it was really fun. Yeah. And then we went to go check out the parade down in the West Village. And let me say that it was so much fun, but it was crazy crowded. And I barely could see anything because I'm just like so short. So I'm just sitting there, like, just like looking up, and I couldn't barely, I was just like literally just watching the parade on people's phones and like as they're filming it. But it was still a good time. And let's see, my thorn of the week. Yes, I actually couldn't come up with one, so I think I'm just going to go with the weather. But it has gotten so cold here in New York, and it's time to break out the winter jackets, and I hate it.
It's a good thing you can't come up with the thorn. I'm here for it.
Exactly. I don't normally like to do the weather, but we're just rolling with that.
The weather, the old scapegoat. We're not mad about it. Hey, okay. So I feel like you guys have parades for everything in New York.
Yeah.
Like every time I turn around, there's another parade.
We do, yeah. And then there's a Veterans Day parade coming up in 2 weeks. And then, well, the Thanksgiving Day parade, which is my favorite also. So I go to that one as well. And I mean, they're really cool. And I guess sometimes it is like, it's nice to be there in person, but it's also nice to like watch it on TV because I feel like you get to see, everything much clearer. Whereas when you're going to these crowded places, a lot of the times you'll probably be like maybe like 10 to 12 rows back, and it makes it hard to really focus and see. But
I actually saw the New York City parade, the Halloween parade on TikTok last night.
Oh, did you? Okay, I'm so not hip to the happenings of New York City. Like the only reason I even knew there was a parade is because Michelle was posting on Instagram, and I was like, I swear, she's always at a parade.
It's really cool though. I always say if someone can go see like one of the parades once in their lifetime, whether Halloween, Thanksgiving, whatever, but people like just dress up in like these like outrageous costumes, and there are really cool floats, and there's like a tons of traditions within them as well. But it was
Since I saw the Ugly Betty, ever since I saw Ugly Betty, I've always wanted to go to the Thanksgiving Macy's Day Parade. So it's definitely a bucket list item for me.
Yeah, we actually found a really good spot. Well, I don't want to give it away, but we actually stand inside of Central Park. But we actually stand inside Central Park, and there's this spot. It's like right by Columbus Circle, but it's like you're away from the crowd. You're not on the street, but you have a clear view of everything. So I think we found it last year. So I think that this year we're going to go there again. Hopefully nobody found our secret, but
love it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So my rose from last weekend, I was just telling the girls before we went live that I went to Fredericksburg. And if you guys aren't familiar with Fredericksburg, it's just outside of Austin. They've got like 160 something crazy wineries. And a lot of them are not the best, but there's a lot of them that are kind of good. So I always like to go. Texas wine has come a long way from what it used to be. And we went with a couple friends, and I just have like a special place in my heart because right before I was getting engaged to my husband, I used to go there all the time. So it just always is like nostalgic for me. And we went back and went to a couple of my favorite wineries, and it was just so much fun. Loved it. And then Thorn, I also struggle. I'm on the same trajectory as Michelle. It's probably like I'm stuck between one, I was a very old person last night and didn't do anything for Halloween. It was boring. And next year I would like to rectify that. And then the other one is I've been experimenting with like the beach waver, which is like this like 3-rung thing that gives you natural beach waves, but really it just made my hair really, really frizzy and poofy. So that was a disappointment because I spent money on it and I'm like, I'm going to figure this thing out. So anyways, just highly vet whatever you're purchasing from that perspective before you buy it. That's probably my thorn. What about you, Marlyn?
So, my rose this week was being very busy and training a new employee. And I have to say that is one of my best things, because when you see an employee that really gets it, you're like, either I am just the world's best teacher, which is probably not true, or he's just really getting it, which is probably true. And I'm fine with either one. So that was very good. My thorn is training new employees because as I was telling you two before we started that, this is the estate planner's busiest season. And like I said, as soon as the kids go back to school, people can finally read that 70-page trust that we gave to them 3 months ago. But it just means that there's a lot coming in. So it's just like, we got to take time for training, and now we have to draft more 70-page trusts. So it's, that was my thorn, but a good thorn, a very good thorn to have.
I love it. We're going to gas Marlyn up this entire time and just talk about how amazing of a teacher she is, because we firmly believe that here at Empowered Women, you guys. She's the best teacher that there is. Yeah. And she brings up a good point with regard to especially being an entrepreneur. There are so many things that are very, very, very difficult pills to swallow, but they're necessary to do, and they're going to give you joy and fill you up, but they're also going to stress you out. And you have to figure out how to combat both sides, and that is being an entrepreneur. So thanks for that reminder, because that's something that we talk about often on this podcast. And I'm also going through a lot of the same thing in my business right now. I'm training a new employee, and it's so rewarding. Especially for me, one of the most rewarding things is whenever they get it way faster than you ever did. And you're like, whoa, this is so cool. But then there are so many things that we, as entrepreneurs, it's knowledge that we possess in our brain. And sometimes we just think that it's common knowledge, and it's not. So it's having to break everything down a little bit further.
Right.
Awesome. Well, we are so excited to have you, Marlyn. This has literally been one of the top things that we want to talk about. As you know, we like to talk about, to speak specifically to women from a planning perspective. There can be so many things when it comes to financial planning or tax planning or estate planning that are just very cumbersome and clunky, and we feel a little bit intimidated by getting into the space. And there's so much, I mean, I had the opportunity to meet Marlyn a little while ago. We sat down and chatted a little bit about who she is and her story. And she is amazing, you guys. She has so much value to offer for you guys. And I'm so excited for her to kind of peel back the layers of what might seem scary or might seem like something you don't necessarily need to worry about right now. But I'm really happy that she's going to be able to shed some light on how important it is to be thinking about these things, and then walking us through the complexities and making it a little bit more digestible for us. So without further ado, if you want to take a few minutes to briefly introduce yourself, share a little bit about your background, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So as you said, Marlyn Schulz over there, and estate planning attorney. I've been doing this for about 8 years now. And I'm licensed to practice in Texas and California. You'd be surprised to know that, Texas and California are both community property states. So there's a lot of congruity in terms of those estate plans. And so it's just a really interesting field to be in right now, especially since there are a lot of Californians migrating to Texas. And so it's just very exciting to be a part of that. Yeah. Estate planning it's near and dear to me. I know a lot of people have a hard time sort of confronting their mortality. And I'm just like, no, let's talk.
I love it.
Yeah, well, it's true. And it can be a cumbersome topic, but I mean, to me, it's just one of those things, it's like death and taxes, right? Like one of those two things, both of those things are going to happen. And you gotta take care of it. And it's easy. Like, that's the other thing. I think people think that it's a lot harder than it actually is. The weight is actually borne by your attorney. You just need to say what you want. That's it. That's really it. And so if you're comfortable with having that conversation and your attorney is asking you what should be maybe some impertinent and uncomfortable questions from time to time, if you can manage through that, then you can get this done. It's not that hard. It's really not that hard.
I love it. I love it. And then I just had one more question kind of piggybacking off of that, because you mentioned something I found really interesting about, people coming into your office and feeling like they need to know everything or have all the answers. Right. Do you think that it behooves them to do a little bit of thinking about those complexities and those topics before they come see you? Or do you feel like you prompt them pretty well in that regard?
So, what I like to start out with is, just have a 30,000-foot overview of what estate planning looks like, because it's different for every family. But as long as you know, the basic components of what makes an estate plan, like you need to have a document that transfers your things to the people that you care about when you pass away. That's rule number one. Rule number two, while you're alive, you probably want to have some documentation about who makes medical and financial decisions for you. What happens if you can't speak? Well, let's write down what you want to do. And that's just basically the 30,000-foot overview of what you need to do. You don't need to know the tax law. You don't need to know real estate law or anything along those lines. That's really for your attorney and for the supporting attorneys in that field to help you out with. What you need to have is a very clear picture about where you want your things to go. Let your attorney worry about the details. That's our job. That's our job to think, okay, is this a taxable event? Is there going to be family dynamic issues? Do we need to worry about somebody who's disabled who might be knocked off benefits? We ask those questions because we need to know that. You don't need to worry about that. That's what we do.
Love it.
Yeah. So Marlyn, we were browsing around your website a little bit and we saw that you listed your why. No, it was good. I feel that it's so important, to tell others what your why is. So can you explain to us a little bit more about what your why is and, why you were led into this field?
Sure. So I chose estate planning as my area of law because when I was in my 20s, I actually lost my father, and he had a terminal illness and did not have an estate plan. And I think that speaks a lot to how hard it is for some people to really, confront that issue of mortality. And I watched my mom go through what was probably not the most forgiving probate system. And she did it with an attorney who really did not look at her as though she was important. And all of that is preventable. And, it was one of the hallmarks of my office. When you come in, I mean, to borrow a line from the Olive Garden, your family, you should come in and you should feel comfortable because, the conversations that we're going to have are going to touch on some topics that may not be, the most comfortable topics to talk about with somebody that you just met. But, we make sure that we make sure that when you're in this office that you feel empowered to have those conversations without feeling embarrassed or without feeling like, you're doing something wrong, and we have clients from all angles of life. And, that's the one underpinning, is that life happens, and everybody is different and everybody has struggles. And we are here to make sure that we eliminate as many of those as possible during one of the toughest time frames you'll ever go through. And so that's really why I do it, because I mean, if you've ever, and we do this a lot in probate, I do practice probate too, but when you watch somebody who's just buried their loved one have to stand up in front of a judge and do a will prove up, I mean, it's a 15-minute, very easy, list of questions. Did this person die? Yes. Are you their wife? Yes. Like just very, very simple questions. But people break down in the middle of that. Your family doesn't have to go through that. That is also very preventable. And I think, if you can show people a way to ease the burden off of their loved ones, then I think you've done your job.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Okay, so you brought up a couple things that I want to ask a little bit probing questions on so we can clear up. So for somebody that's coming in like ground zero, like maybe they're like, I just got married, I need to start thinking about this, but it feels so overwhelming. Can you briefly explain? We've thrown a couple terms around, estate planning and probate, et cetera. Can you briefly explain a little bit about what estate planning is at a high level, and then why it's important for the average person? And then obviously it wouldn't be Empowered Women Live if we didn't focus on why it's specifically important for women.
Right. So I know that term can be a little bit confusing, estate planning. People hear that and they think that, well, that means I must have an estate, like land and horses and maybe a footman or two. No, it doesn't require any of that. In short, estate planning is basically the plan that takes your assets to your loved ones when you pass away. It should also encompass what happens if you're incapacitated. I think that's also a really, really important part of what we do. But that's essentially it. And in terms of the importance of it, I can't stress it enough. One of the things that you really want to make sure that you do is have your wishes be respected. I think that is something that people think, well, I'm just going to let my spouse deal with it, or I'm just going to let my kids deal with it. Everything's going to be fine. I can guarantee you it's not going to turn out that way. I can't tell you that enough. I've had clients come in here and say, I don't really think we need to do this because, my kids, they'll be fine with it. And I'm sort of like, you don't really know that. And it's going to be one of those moments where your children, all of a sudden, because you're the glue who keeps it together, you're gone. Fights happen, and nerves and emotions are so raw after somebody passes away. It's one of the most stressful things that you can go through in your lifetime. And again, if you can just take that burden off their shoulders, it's just so important, so incredibly important. And, to use your example, if you're a young married couple, you might not think that it needs to be done. But the reality is you don't know what's going to happen. And you really want to make sure, again, that you're leaving your spouse with the peace of mind that this is taken care of, that this is not something that they need to worry about, that they know what your wishes are going to be, regardless of the situation. And I think, again, that's really why we do it.
And I think, the work that you do is so important. I think there are so many times when an unfortunate chain of events that, well, first of all, when somebody passes away emotionally, that's so hard to deal with, and your emotions are heavy and raw and everything is crazy, not to mention the fact that there are all these logistical things that need to happen. I remember when my grandmother passed away, my mom was like the executor on the will. But it wasn't fleshed out. Unfortunately, she didn't get to work with an attorney that was giving her any time of day. There was a lot of nuance going on. And, it was really bad with regard to like how things were, playing out with what needed to happen logistically and her siblings. And it just, all of that is avoidable. And I will never forget, as soon as that was settled, my parents hired an estate attorney and got everything rock solid. Immediately, they were like, we're not messing around with this. They told all three of us like who we were in the will. Like they were like, no, this is where it is. This is what's happening. And it was such an eye-opening experience for them. So I just think that it's so important to be thinking about these things when times aren't tough, right? Because you have no idea what's going to transpire after the fact.
And the last thing you want to do is have to try and put this together under duress. That is also something that you really, really want to avoid. You know, there was, oh goodness, I'm going to date myself by referencing this, but I think it's a really important example. There was a woman in Florida probably 30 years ago. I want to say her name was Terry Schiavo, and she got into an accident and was in a persistent vegetative state, right? And many people have said over and over, I do not want to be in this. Please pull the plug, all of that. And according to her husband, they had that conversation verbally and that she never wanted to be in that state. Her parents decided to litigate that because they did not want him to end life support. And so for 10 years, she was in that persistent vegetative state. For 10 years, the medical bills are piling up, the litigation costs are going up. I mean, and just imagine what your family is going through at that moment, trying to sort of decipher what exactly she wanted and not having anything written down. I mean, that is so simple to fix. It is so simple. Yeah. Right. And again, preventable, completely preventable.
Yeah.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. And that actually reminds me, you're saying to list out, you know, everything you want. So my grandma she actually did. I actually have a copy of this paper that she has, but she listed out like every single one of her accounts and what it was going to be used for. And she actually like listed out, you know, her clothes that she wanted to be buried in, and like down to like the T. So, you know, we didn't have to worry and, you know, decide what she wanted.
It's a love letter. That's essentially what she left you, was a love letter.
Yeah. And I still have it. I made like a few copies, and sometimes like when I'm missing her, like I'll go and look at it, look at her handwriting, but there's like, remember when she showed me it one day, I was like, oh, like,
that's good. That hits right here.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. It does.
I love it, Michelle.
Yeah. So to stay on the topic of women, we'll say, you know, statistically speaking, women typically outlive their husbands. Right. So in your experience, do you see that women typically do more of the life event planning?
Yes, 90% of the calls that come to my office are made by women about their families. I am going to drag my husband in here kicking and screaming. We're getting this done. I'm like, bravo, you are doing the work. You are absolutely doing the work. And it is women, you know, 9 times out of 10, they outlive their husbands. They actually make the sacrifices that help out their children, sometimes very much to their detriment. And you know, we can't praise our moms enough. I feel like there is an endless amount that needs to happen. But the reality is, you know, sometimes we also have to, you know, pressure our parents and our mothers sometimes to actually get this sort of thing done. And it's literally because they're going to be left holding that bag. They're the ones who do the family planning. They're the ones that, you know, when your kids need to have lunches prepared, it's on the kitchen counter before they go to school. They're the ones that are coordinating the calendar. This is just a much bigger viewpoint in terms of that calendar to say, okay, how are we taking care of these things? You know, the number one thing that I always counsel my parents on is the importance of the guardianship nomination. This is the document that spells out who is taking care of your kids in the event you and your spouse have, you know, become incapacitated at the same time, or God forbid, you passed away at the same time. You know, without having that document in place, you're really sort of rolling the dice on who gets care and custody of your children. And that can be a very scary thing. I mean, again, imagine your parents, you're like, you're 6 or 7 maybe, and your parents can't take care of you anymore. And now you're in the hands of CPS. I mean, that can happen. If you don't have relatives nearby, if you don't have trusted friends that the authorities are willing to give your children over to, even temporarily, you have a really big problem on your hands. And, you know, I'm always an advocate for protecting children in any way possible. And this is one of those ways, again, very easy to do, very, very easy to do. Just give it some thought, write it down, just write it down, you know, and, you know, take care of your kids. That's what moms do. That's what moms always do. And so, again, just another way to help women sort of prepare for those things. So that's where we go.
And then I feel like you've hit on a couple of these already, but just because, you know, I'm someone who's very curious about your line of work and kind of what the trajectory looks like. So what are some common misconceptions that people have about estate planning as a whole? And how can these misconceptions that they're walking around carrying with them really impact their financial future and just their future in general?
So I've thought about that a few times. The number one misconception that I get from people, especially married couples, is that if it's community property, that means that my spouse automatically gets my half, and that is not necessarily true. So if you have a blended family and you don't have an estate plan, the children from the prior marriage actually get that 1/2 interest, but it's held by you as the surviving spouse in a life estate. If you decide to abandon that property and sell it for whatever reason, those children get half of the proceeds. So it doesn't automatically just go to you. For sure, you have some homestead protections, but you really want to make sure if you want your surviving spouse to not just be able to live in the house, but also if they need that money, if they need to sell that house, that they get the full proceed, then you need to plan for that ahead of time.
Wow.
And that's a real big eye opener for people. That is the number one thing. Well, I'm just going to let the laws of the state of Texas do it. And I'm like, maybe not your best bet.
Maybe you should think about that again.
Think about that for a little bit. So that's a really common misconception. The other really common misconception I get is that, that this is going to be cost prohibitive, or that this is going to be one of those things that's going to take forever, that it's going to be tedious. It can get complicated. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to say you're going to step into your estate planning attorney and they're just going to churn out a document. If that happens, you need to turn around and leave. This is a bad place to be. But what it should do, honestly, it should be an in-depth conversation. And that is something that takes time. And, what you want to do is make sure that it's time well spent, that it's money well spent. I have a lot of people that think I can't afford a trust. I'm just going to let the probate system take care of things later. Okay. You're going to pay, let's say you've got a married couple, you have an estate plan for both of them. Let's say we top out about $2,000. Let's say it's a very nuclear family, right? Mom and dad, white picket fence, 2.3 kids, a dog. Fine. $2,000 for that will-based estate plan in Texas. Each one of you is going to have a probate when you pass away. So now we're talking about double probate. And right now for a will-based estate plan, assuming again, very simple distributions, nobody's arguing, everything goes blue skies, we're still talking about, $2,000 to $2,500 per person to die. The average cost of a trust-based estate plan for that same family is only $4,500. And you're spending that money now versus what you may be paying for probate in the future. I mean, I'm quoting prices for today. I have no idea what it's going to cost in 20 or 30 years, but I can tell you two things. One, my fee never goes down. That is number one truth. Number two, court costs never go down either. And so you really need to think about this from the perspective of, yes, there's some upfront costs that you're probably going to need to foot, and that can be a little bit painful. I get that. But the amount of time and money that you were spending on or I should say saving on the back end of that, I mean, you can't get better than that. You really just can't get any better than that. So that's what I tell people. It's just like, make sure you're thinking about this, not from the perspective of today, but how this is going to play out later, because that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where it gets costly.
That's so funny, because it's like, of course it's not going to get cheaper.
It's true. It's very true. Don't get me wrong. I do give friends and family discounts to very deserving people. So don't feel like when you come in, okay, there's like a chart on the wall and you just point. That's not how it works, and everybody's different. But I mean, seriously, in 20 years, it is not going to be that same price. There's no way. There's just no way.
And also, you guys, like, when it comes to these sorts of decisions and these delineations that are being made, it's kind of important that you're paying somebody who knows what they're doing. So,
right. Yeah, right.
And as we alluded to earlier, you kind of get what you pay for, right? So you definitely want to make sure that you're working with somebody who understands the complexities, because there's so many of them.
Oh, yeah. Right. And, one of the things that I get, and I have to talk about this because I get this question all the time in my webinars. Can I do this myself? Can I DIY my estate plan? Okay. So you can. I'm not going to say that you can't. But again, let's think about the cost factor later on. Okay. Don't go to LegalZoom and get it done. There is a cottage industry of attorneys that do nothing but fix problems with LegalZoom estate plans. It can be because you just don't know what you don't know. And that's the unfortunate part. You really do want to pay for that expertise. Get it done right the first time. Don't guess. This is not a place where you want to guess. It's like your taxes. You really want to guess about how you do your taxes? Probably not. The unfortunate part though is that you'll be dead and somebody else gets to deal with it, right? Don't do that. That's not the letter that you want to leave to your family. Believe me, that is not the one.
That is the opposite of a love letter, in fact.
No, you kind of have to wonder. It's like, did you care? Because it feels like you didn't.
I've seen some disastrous impacts for failing to plan in this regard. And so many of my friends and family have experienced it. And it's just, I mean, honestly, it's just like Marlyn's been saying. It's so simple.
Right.
Just have the conversation before you have to have the conversation, right? It's not something you want to procrastinate on. As much as all of us want to live to be centennials, we don't know that that's going to happen. And even if it does, we're all going to die eventually. That's one thing that's guaranteed.
That is absolutely true.
Yeah. Even though, this topic could be uncomfortable, it's just something, you have to do and plan for.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, Marlyn, what age or what are some life events that you feel someone should be starting to consider creating an estate plan?
So I tell people at age 18, when the law says that you're capable of making your decisions, you should at least have healthcare and financial directives. The most likely scenario in terms of an 18-year-old is not death. It happens, don't get me wrong, it absolutely does, it's very tragic. But the more likely scenario is that you are in some sort of, incapacity moment, whatever that is and however it's triggered. So you really want to make sure that the people that you trust are the ones making your decisions. And, I'm not going to get political or anything along those lines, but this is really important for people in the LGBTQ community, because you really want to make sure that the people that you trust are the ones making those decisions. They may or may not be your family, or they might be certain members of your family. But when you turn 18, you really want to make sure that you have something like that in your back pocket, because it can be really important. But yeah, and then, the later on you go in life, the more things you acquire, you really want to start thinking about, okay, how much of a mess am I leaving behind? And that's not to say that if you don't own anything, you shouldn't have an estate plan, because you're still going to be paying for probate. But do yourself a favor and just start thinking about, okay, who is this impacting? When I pass away, who's going to be the one with the shovel trying to clean this up? Is it really, is it going to be a mess? Because if it is, you should really think about that. Another really simple technique, beneficiary designations. I mean, those are your friend. You can put those on your bank accounts. They're automatically on your life insurance policies, your retirement accounts, your annuities. These are the kinds of things where, it takes 5 minutes. Call up your financial institution and say, I want to make sure that this goes to X. I want to make sure that somebody gets a percentage. They can do all of that. It's free.
Yeah.
It's free. It's simple. So I would at least do that. When you're 18, get your directives done, put those beneficiary designations on your account. And then again, when you start getting older, when you get married and have children, you absolutely better have an estate plan in place. I mean, if for no other reason, just take care of your children, take care of your spouse.
Yeah. I love that. And I know that you've talked a little bit about some of the components that are necessary. You just talked about some of the components that are necessary with regard to an estate plan. And I know that you talked earlier about how when folks come in, you give them an educational component of exactly what they should be thinking about. So how do you tailor your estate planning services to make them understandable and accessible for people who maybe maybe they're just a blank slate when they walk in your office?
Sure. Yeah. No, that starts with the consult. So before you even come in the door, lawyers, regardless of whether they tell you this or not, number one thing they're doing is they're checking for crazy. They want to make sure that you're not crazy, that I'm not crazy, all of that. You want to make sure you have a good feel. So that's number one. But the other thing that we're doing is we're asking you those probing questions about, what are the kinds of assets that you have? How do we intend to get them to where you want them to go, and where do you want them to go? And then I'll have maybe, a 20-minute conversation with them about, here are the things that I think might actually be beneficial for you, and here's why. I'm not going to drill down, because you can't. In 20 minutes, there's just no way to do that. But then if the plan that I propose to them sounds like something that they're interested in, then they come in and they have that intake meeting, which is basically my learning session with them. I ask them those uncomfortable questions, and I tell them flat out, this is going to, in many ways, be very probing and maybe some ways uncomfortable. But the reality is, the more I know, the more bespoke your estate plan actually becomes. The next meeting we have after that is, after those documents have been drafted, we go through each one and I explain in real life example land, how do each of these work? When do they spring into effect? Is it upon death? Is it upon incapacity? Is it effective while you're alive and aware? All of those things. And we talk about the what ifs. Okay, well, what happens if I own a small business and I'm incapacitated? Who's running that business? What happens if I'm incapacitated, but my spouse has passed away? Who's taking care of my kids then? And we start putting those mechanics into place, because I think it's really important for people to see the example. I can set a piece of paper in front of them and say, okay, read this. There'll be a quiz on this later. But the reality is, if they don't see how this works in real time, it does not make any sense. And so we make sure that we have that document review meeting. It is very thorough, and it can last almost as long as our intake meeting, because I encourage people to ask questions. I'm like, look, this is your learning session. We just had mine in the intake. Now it's your turn to ask me, how does this work? And so to the extent that we can give them, the drilled down answer, we will absolutely do that.
I love it.
That's great. Yeah, I love that you educate your clients so much. We've all been around that person that just, puts it down. It's like, okay, read this, sign.
No.
Exactly. No. So I love that. You're educating your clients so much. And, we talked a lot about how important it is to, get your estate planning in order. What strategies do you recommend to empower women to take a more active role in, estate planning and also their financial planning?
So the first thing I talk to them about is, whether or not they have a financial advisor, whether or not they've talked to somebody about long-term care and disability insurance, because those are the what if things. We want to make sure that that's in play. I also encourage women to really do, some thinking, and sometimes that's just as simple as engaging in some self-care, sitting out on your front porch without the kids, without the husband, and just sort of thinking about, okay, how do you want this to play out? I encourage women to have conversations with their husbands and their partners. How does this affect them? What are their goals? And sometimes that is a very mutually held goal. And I think that that's really the point, is that, I know that women in many instances, we bear a lot of things on ourselves and we think, okay, this is for me to deal with. I'm the planner. I'm going to be the one to do this. But the reality is, you can also be the quarterback on this. And I think that that's really the important piece, is that, if you're running the family, then run it, do this. Because if he's doing things like he's mowing the lawn and he's cutting limbs off, or he's doing whatever it is that men do on the outside, do that and do yourself a favor and sit down with him over dinner and just say, look, these are the things that we absolutely need to get into play. It would make me feel very comfortable to know that this is taken care of. And if it's an uncomfortable situation, then ease your way into that. Because again, drawing back to my own father, terminally ill, no estate plan. I get it. It can be very difficult to sit down and have that conversation. But, reality hits really hard sometimes. And I think that, when your spouse is coming to you asking you to do something, I think that that really helps. But again, having that conversation with your financial advisor, men understand the money too, and when another man is telling them, hey, you should get this done, maybe that helps. Sometimes you have to call in reinforcements.
I'm saying.
Listen, they can be very stubborn sometimes, but that's just something that you need to think about, is, if you're not going to be the influential party in terms of getting your partner into the door, who is going to be, and how do you make that influence pool happen? Because again, like I said, this estate plan, it is your love letter. You want to be the one to write that. You don't want the state of Texas to write it for you. And so, making sure that you have those conversations with your family, it helps. It really does help. And just sort of taking that elephant out of the room, and making it a little bit more livable. It's one of those things.
We want personalized love letters, you guys, not templated ones that are handed down by the state. Okay.
The holidays are coming, folks. Just remember, gifts don't always have to come in boxes. Sometimes they come in paper.
That is true.
Oh my God. I love it. Well, this has been so amazing, Marlyn. Thank you so much for illuminating all of this information. I know I personally have been so curious about all of this, and I know that this is immensely helpful to our listeners. So I'm going to ask you the $1 million question, which is, where can we get in touch with you? Where can we spend time with you and follow along on your journey?
Sure. So the best place to start is brenhamaestateplans.com. That's our website. We are on all the socials. I think my marketing person is trying to talk me into doing a TikTok channel, but honestly, I'm like, I don't know if I want that much camera time. So we'll see about that.
Fair enough.
But we also host quarterly webinars for people, and it can be a group as small as 2 or as large as 35. We actually had one group attended by almost 115 people not too long ago. But essentially what we do is we just take that 30,000-foot view of what estate planning is, and we always leave time open for questions. If that is not going to answer your question, by all means, just contact the office. I'm more than happy to sit down with somebody and just talk them through the process, because again, it's important.
Love it. So you guys heard it. Everyone go book your estate planning session on her calendar, because she is obviously freaking capable, as she just showed you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. It really means the world to us to illuminate complex topics like this for everyone. There is so much to consider, whether you're an entrepreneur or you're not. These are things that you guys need to be thinking about. You need to be making sure that you're working with somebody that is a trusted advisor. And there's no one size fits all solution. You need a financial advisor. You also need an estate planning attorney. You need someone who can advise you on tax. All of these people are going to be, your team that you can put in the starting lineup to help you have peace of mind surrounding these topics.
Very true.
Awesome. And we're so excited to chat with you guys next week. Michelle and I have a lot of really, really exciting things coming down the pipe. If you guys haven't seen on our socials, we just wrote our first ebook. It's on burnout and its impacts. And if you guys would like a copy, we are giving away free copies right now on a trial basis. So shoot us a DM, comment ebook on some of our past posts that have been up, and we will send you the information so that you can download it for yourself.
Very cool.
Awesome. You guys have a good one.
Happy Wine Wednesday. We'll see everyone next week.